Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my hands-on first looks review of the Canon RF 10-20mm f4L IS, an ultra-wide zoom lens for the EOS R mirrorless system that's corrected for full-frame bodies. Yep, you heard that correctly, 10mm on full frame, and it's not a fisheye either. This is a rectilinear lens, which means straight lines stay straight rather than becoming curved, making it perfect for architecture as well as landscape and videography. It delivers not just the widest coverage in the RF system to date, but also becomes the world's widest full-frame zoom with autofocus. Now this kind of performance doesn't come cheap though, with the RF 10-20 costing around £2,500 when launched in October 2023. £2,500 is obviously a lot of money, but it's actually a little bit cheaper than the older EF 11-24mm f4L, a model which it effectively replaces. And while it doesn't zoom quite as far at the long end, it does capture a wider field of view while being considerably smaller, lighter, and now also sporting image stabilization. As a quick aside, cross-platform lens fans may already be aware of Laowa's 10-18mm f4.5 to 5.6, which matches the full-frame coverage of the new Canon at the wide end, but at a much lower price of around $700 or pounds. But the Laowa is a much simpler manual focus only lens with a dimmer aperture, no image stabilization or weather sealing either, and it's also only available in Sony, Leica L or Nikon Z mounts right now. So let's get back to the new Canon zoom, which I had a brief chance to try out at a press briefing. Considering the extreme coverage on offer, the RF 10-20 is a surprisingly compact lens, measuring just 84 by 112mm, and that includes its built-in petal hood, and the weight is just 570 grams. This actually makes it roughly similar in size and weight to the RF 14-35 f4L IS, seen here on the right with its lens hood fitted. Now this was previously the widest lens in the RF system and currently costs around $1,500 or £1,750, making it roughly half the price of the newer 10-20. But both lenses are miniatures compared to the giant EF 11-24 f4L seen here on the left. The new 10-20 in the middle is not only around 2 cm shorter and narrower, but just under half the weight. Yes, that old EF lens weighs over a kilogram, and if you were to add the EF to EOS R adapter in order for it to work on mirrorless bodies, the physical differences become even more obvious. Just look at the old EF 11-24mm here adapted to the EOS R5 body, where it's clear just how hefty and front heavy this lens is. Now, I loved its coverage and quality when it came out in 2015, but at almost 1.2 kilograms for the lens alone, you certainly knew you were carrying it around. Just compare it to the new RF 10-20 here, mounted on the same R5 body, and it's obvious how much more portable and practical the new lens is in comparison. As a member of Canon's L series, the 10-20 is fully sealed against dust and moisture, including a rubber grommet at the mount. Here you'll also notice a rear-mounted filter holder, as the bulbous front element and extreme coverage rule out front-mounted screw-in filters. Like other ultra-wide lenses, the supplied cap fits over the built-in petal hood. There's 3 rings on the barrel, starting with the zoom ring closest to the body, which, as you can see, extends the front element within the barrel. It's furthest out at the 10mm focal length. Alongside the zoom ring is a very smooth and free-spinning manual focus ring, followed by a customizable RF control ring towards the end of the barrel. Alongside switches for autofocus and optical stabilization, you'll find a custom button which is set to AF stop by default. Now Canon normally reserves these buttons for super telephotos only, but customization can make them useful on any lens. In terms of focusing, you'd be forgiven for assuming it's Canon's usual USM system, but the 10-20 becomes the first in the L series to employ an STM focusing motor, possible here due to the light focusing group. It's faster at focusing than the old EF 11-24 and smoother too, which videographers will appreciate. The new lens also doesn't reset the focusing distance on power up, which allows it to start up faster. The closest focusing distance is 25 cm. I had a brief chance to try out a pre-production RF 10-20 to compare its coverage against the RF 14-35 and EF 11-24 lenses. So let's start with a video example of the 10-20mm range, filmed in 4K HQ mode on the R5, showing not just the epic coverage available at the wide end, but also how the geometry remains very well behaved with no unwanted curvature. But all 3 of these lenses are rectilinear designs, so to put their coverage into context, let's see what you can get with the RF 14-35 when it's at its widest 14mm. Now that's pretty wide, but now here's the EF 11-24 at 11mm, capturing a much wider field of view. Now remember, this was previously the widest rectilinear lens in the system. But now for the new RF 10-20 at 10mm, proving that even just 1mm difference may not sound like much, but in wide-angle focal length terms actually makes a bigger difference in terms of coverage than you might first expect. To further illustrate the difference, let's stick with the 10-20 view at 10mm before superimposing a green frame, where the outer edge represents the EF 11-24 coverage when it's set to 11mm. And now the outer edge of the red frame represents the RF 14-35 coverage when it's at 14mm. I generated these graphics using my actual sample images, so these are the differences that you will see in practice. But while the 10-20 clearly zooms wider than the other two lenses, it obviously won't reach as far. So here's how the new lens looks at its longest focal length of 20mm. And now for the EF 11-24 at 24mm, before seeing how much closer the RF 14-35 can reach when it's at 35mm. To illustrate the differences again, here's the 10-20 at 20mm again, before superimposing a green frame which represents the 11-24 at 24. And finally a red frame representing the coverage of the 14-35 at 35mm. Again, these were generated using my actual sample images, and the respective coverage is indicated by the outer edges of each frame. This time, clearly the 14-35 enjoys considerably longer reach than the others, not to mention the broadest range and the lowest price, plus the chance to screw in standard filters, but equally it's the least wide of the three. Just before wrapping up, the new RF 10-20 becomes the first Canon lens to include peripheral control image stabilization. This is designed to work with bodies that have sensor shift IBIS stabilization built in, and it claims to reduce that wobbling effect often seen in the corners of ultra-wide angle lenses when you're filming video. It's particularly apparent when you're walking and talking and doing a vlog. Now, I was sadly unable to illustrate this on my pre-production lens and R5 body, but I still filmed a handheld clip for you to illustrate the potential coverage at 10mm with IBIS and optical IS enabled. Canon claims 5 stops of compensation on bodies without IBIS, or 6 for those that do. And for comparison, here's the RF 14-35 at 14mm, and while that lens also has optical IS, it's clearly nowhere near as wide. And if you're also thinking about applying digital stabilization, the new lens has much greater latitude for accommodating a crop. Okay, now for my verdict so far. The Canon RF 10-20mm f4L is an unashamedly high-end lens aimed at those who demand the widest coverage without compromising on quality, distortion, or having to lug around a hefty chunk of glass. Compared to the old EF 11-24, which it effectively replaces, the new 10-20 not only zooms a bit wider and now sports image stabilization, but it is considerably smaller and lighter, making it a much more practical proposition. This is a lens that you'd be happy to carry around all day with you rather than just on special occasions, and it'll also balance much better on gimbals or on a tripod. Again, this performance doesn't come cheap, but in fairness, the RF 10-20 is launched at a lower price than the 8-year-old 11-24mm still sells for, and I know which one I'd rather have. That said, if you're satisfied with 14mm coverage, and lest we forget that it's still pretty wide, the RF 14-35 will give it to you at half the price, with the benefit of reaching comfortably further, and again it also takes standard screw-in filters on the front. Obviously, it would also be nice if Laowa were able to launch an RF version of its manual focus 10-18, but that's the current state of play in the EOS R system. So let me know what you think in the comments, especially if you've used or owned the older EF 11-24. And again, once I've tested a final production model, I'll link to my review here, and any sample images that I capture in the meantime will also be available at cameralabs.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.